Good evening, you sexy people of the internet, and welcome to the first ever episode of Shoutcasting for Muppets. Today, we're going to be giving you a masterclass of everything that is to do with introducing a show. And on top of all that, the costs for all of you back at home that are watching this stream is going to be whatever the fuck you want it to be, because all of the proceeds for this stream and all the streams that we're having are going to charity. And for the month of August, we have selected Ooga Chugga as our charity of choice. Ooga Chugga is a community-based, non-profit, professional organization working with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning and queer LGBTQ+ individuals, couples, and families in Singapore since 1999. You can find them on oogachugga.com. I've linked all of their social media accounts as well as their website in the Twitch description, as well as in the Facebook post that we did earlier. Check them out. They're a fantastic organization. And before I introduce the other Muppets that I have here tonight, just a quick disclaimer. Ooga Chugga is not affiliated to the stream. Neither is Riot Games affiliated to the stream. And all the opinions of every single Muppet that's about to yell at you on this stream are their own. Maybe not Opal. We just don't talk about him too much. But let's get right into it, shall we? And introduce the people that we have here today. First up, we have the most fucking handsome caster I've ever seen in my life. You might know him from Channel News Asia as the shoutcasting godfather of Singapore. He is the shoutcaster extraordinaire that has brought up multiple generations of talent in this country. It's Daryl,
only 25.
Hungry Cast Lim. How are you doing today, Mr. 25?
Okay, I was not expecting that long ass introduction. Pretty good on the introduction for Ooga Chugga. So, Matthew is had this all prepped already, so we're kind of like doing this for the first time. And like you said, disclaimer, we are going to say some horrible things. I mean, without anyone being really represented here. So we're just going to go in and try our best to give you guys an entertaining show. And hopefully, you learn something. The best part is there's no real curriculum, so to speak. So we're just trying our best to provide you guys with information, free-flowing information, as it were.
Absolutely. We'll go into that a little bit later on as well. But next up, we have the biggest brain in Southeast Asia. Multiple titles with amateur teams in Singapore. Then, this little team called Legacy in the OPL comes calling. Knock, knock. We can't beat the Chiefs. Direwolves came around, slapped us all about as well. And then finally, Judge's like, you know what? Fuck this. Rocks up to the OPL and finally wins the damn thing for them for the first time ever. Welcome to the show, Jensen. What's up today?
Well, I mean, if you guys are interested with the Australian story, I did a whole little mini game in terms of if you are a coach in the Zimbabwe Professional League, can you
I remember that. That game was fun, dude.
You can check out my Twitter. I've got some interesting content with regards to that. And you can message me and I can link you the link to play the game as well.
Yeah, I mean, that game, the Zimbabwe Professional League, was actually a ton of fun to play. Go and check out Jensen's social media. I believe it still should be up somewhere, and try it yourself. It is difficult, but it's a lot of fun to go through. And, last and definitely least, we have Opal. Hi.
Oh, hey, Fish. What you signed me up for? I'm a little concerned now. Everybody gets a grand intro, and it's like you haven't left the office back with me in Shanghai. I thought I got rid of you, but the attitude is still there, so I think we need to have another chat.
You've been pretty sick lately, Opal. We actually didn't know if you were going to be on this show until 10 minutes before it started, so we had a Muppet lined up.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. I had to peek out there. I saw the audience was worried about me. Yeah, that's what happens when you don't send our call time until an hour or two before the actual show is going to start. So whose fault is that?
Hey, I gave you a full rundown of this intro as well as what time we're starting on Friday. Thank you very much. 3 days before the show.
If casting doesn't work out for you, you can start at OnlyFans. Just go real close to the mic and just speak like that and tell a story. It sounds really good.
We're just going to get ASMR?
Yeah,
is this how we're actually going to start casting?
Secondary career, just in case.
Perfect.
All right, fantastic. Well, let's jump into what we're doing today. What we're doing is basically a shoutcasting masterclass, but we're going to be focusing on very specific parts of shoutcasting in every single episode. So like the title suggests, today is going to be all about introducing a show, from everything you need to do before the show itself, to the experts that we're going to be talking to today, which are going to be Opal, as well as Jupiter Storm, Mr. Jensen Go. And Daryl and myself will be going through a mock cast all the way until Champion Select of a Pacific Championships League game for the PCS. So before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about what introducing a show should look like. And the mood of this show is basically, we're going to fucking have fun, all right? So this is not some boring classroom shit or some lecture, we might yell at you. So if you're not ready to be yelled at by Muppets, not the show for you guys. So just be careful.
Like, just chilling in the fridge at about 7:30. I'm gonna grab a tall boy and get the party started just a little bit.
I woke up too late. I was planning on actually getting a couple from the market like down the road, but then I woke up at like a little late because I've been a little bit sick. And I was like, well, I could like stall the show by 15 minutes, and that actually might be on brand for the show. But
yeah,
we'll see.
All right,
they have like grab mark there, so
my corner, the holy box, right? So no swearing, no alcohol, no swearing. This is just where purity and goodness lies in this top right hand corner.
Is that why you came 10th, Jensen? Is there no vulgarity in your coaching?
Oh no! All right. Let's
Let's mosey along.
Let's dive right into it before Jensen turns into the Hulk in a second and destroys all of us. I mean, he won the OPL, Alex. I don't think you've done too much in your life besides make clothes for people when you were a tailor. So let's get into it. So we're going to be covering how to introduce the show. So usually, majority of introducing a show is going to start with either your host or your play-by-play commentator. And there's a few different elements to it. You have things like your cold open or a straight open if they just cut directly to you. You introduce your co-caster. You talk about what's happening today. You talk about the league. You talk about the series of events that have led up today and what you're going to expect later on in the day itself. I want to start with you, Opal, because you're the play-by-play caster. And you're going to be our play-by-play expert for today. What are your experiences with opening a show? Like, do you have a general vibe that you try to go for? Do you have general advice when it comes to opening a show? Like, how do you like to do it?
So pretty much, I always go, unless I'm doing a cold open, which is unfortunately, like currently in our current state with COVID, we haven't really done any cold opens for PCS. It's just we don't really have a setup to do a good cold open like you would see in the other regions without it being just a simple voiceover. So what I like to do at it is what we like to call kind of the day statement, at least is what we like to refer to, which is what is the overarching stakes at the moment when it comes to the league, as well as what is on the line here for today. So I think the VOD that you do have us doing today is the tiebreakers of summer. So we already know the teams that are in playoffs, so that is kind of been already set in stone. The stakes, though, that you're trying to establish is, hey, these teams are still fighting for that seeding. They're trying to get a little bit extra safety to get into the top side of the bracket. So there is actually something still on the line. It is literally the last day, though, of the regular season. So you kind of cement this is the last time we'll get to see these teams comfortable, because once we start hitting into playoffs, it's do or die for most of them.
And that's you pretty much sum up everything that a host or a play-by-play commentator should really be looking at. It's basically building that story, building that narrative, and telling people, you're sitting down, you've got a cold one next to you. What is it you're going to expect from today? And then on the flip side, you kind of want to dive deep into it. Now you know what, you want to know the how and why, which is why we have Jensen on this show. So when you're looking at a broadcast, Jensen, and you're trying to get any sort of analytical perspective or any sort of further information beyond just what the story is, what are the key pieces of information you would most want to listen to, or you would really be looking out to when you're tuning into a broadcast?
I think the things I'm looking for is the why behind the story, right? So the play-by-play will set things up and we tell you what's happening. And as the color commentator or the person providing analysis, your job is to provide the why behind the story. Kind of like draw out the big structures of how this team plays and what has been working, what has not been working, and how do they end up in this situation for them to be facing these type of stakes. So you have to play off what the play-by-play has set up for you, and then you need to move in to provide insight. And insight is the key word over here, because you want the audience to be able to perceive, okay, so what has been working, what has not been working, and then you want to do a little bit of projection forward. So what should we be expecting from this team based off what we've seen from them so far?
Awesome. So it's really like filling in all those gaps and just basically getting everyone up to date and up to speed to kind of expect everything that can and will happen later on today, and just what has happened before as well. Explaining that a little bit more in detail, it seems. And the last thing I really want to ask before we move on is, Daryl, you've brought up a ton of fantastic talent in Singapore. I know you've worked a lot with Hey I'm Quack, and he's a fantastic first-person shooter commentator at the moment, up-and-coming first-person shooter commentator. You've seen multiple generations of talent. You've worked with them. You've done multiple workshops. If you had any sort of advice for a new commentator when it came to opening a show, or even just common mistakes that you've seen in the past from new commentators when it comes to opening a show? What would they be, and what would you suggest new commentators to look out for?
I think along the same line of what Opal says, setting the stakes is super important, because I actually took a class and I was talking to my professor about this. Fun fact, still in uni, but yeah, there's this idea of like a narrative transportation, which is the phenomenon where viewers are suspended, right? They basically suspend all their disbelief and they're invested into the show. And how do you create that narrative transportation? There are certain schemas that you can employ. To set the stakes, you use these schemas. So there's always the classic, what's the rivalry here, or are they the underdogs? And I think as a newcaster, you should learn all these, storylines. And if you are a classic literature fan, you'll find a lot of that in the stories of Shakespeare. By using that, you can actually connect with your audience. So there are very specific storylines that you can always use, and you should have like a default list of sorts of what the standard storyline should be, and then you play off that, because it's not always going to be the same, right? It's not always textbook, but when you have a default list of storylines, you kind of use that and try to build onto that as you advance the narrative as the show goes on as well.
Right. I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more as well, especially with everyone else that's on the show today, because that seems to be the biggest mistake that I've identified with newcasters starting their first ever broadcast, because it's very easy to go on a show, sit down and go, welcome to tonight's broadcast. This is my commentator. Today we have X and Y play. Yeah, X team's good, Y team's good. Let's go into Champions League. They're known for this and not known for that. And that's quite bread and butter. It's quite easy to do, but there's no, There's no meat behind it. It's not colorful. It's not entertaining. So I really like that idea of you need to have those narratives in mind, like the rivalry, the underdog story.
Yep.
But what about everyone else here? Like, what are some of the big things you see as either mistakes or things that you've learnt from broadcasts in the past?
I think overall, one good thing that I think a lot of like amateurs or people that are just beginning to cast, one thing that they can learn is trying to identify a kind of 3-layer narrative when it comes into a matchup. So the best way we like to refer to it is player, team, league. Player, if we're talking about, say, PCS, and we're talking about AHQ, Civ, wrist injury, he's been out for the first half of summer. That's his player narrative. He's coming back into the league. He's that king of top lane. That's what we want to see. But then we talk about his team. AHQ, how is the team adapted around him with him being absent and Leaky now starting into the team? Or have they shifted their play style to the bot side of the map? And then when we say League, well, how does this team look to perform if it does go to, say, Worlds 2020? It's giving you multiple layers of that narrative that can end up expanding what little knowledge you may start off with, and making it sound a lot more, and also giving a lot more context to your matchup in a very simple fashion.
I think to build onto that, it's, some people call it 3-layered, but it's pretty much just like zooming out, right? When you look at the player first, and he wants to be the focus point of whatever story you want to talk about, and then you go into the team and then the league, it's kind of like building a bigger picture to allow the audience to get the full idea of what they're looking at, right? Because if you just tunnel on certain things and you don't connect the pieces, then that's where you end up disjointing them emotionally and they don't follow along the storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Jensen, do you have anything to add to that when it comes to opening a show? Do you see because you're the expert, you're the only coach here for a professional League of Legends team. So what would you say, like, a mistake you feel like is made on broadcast a lot, or something that broadcasters just don't do enough when it comes to opening a show?
I do think it's somewhere along the lines of what they mentioned previously. It's about painting a narrative, it's about painting a picture, and I think it's too often it's too common. People just go to the default things and they just repeat a whole bunch of passwords when it comes to selling something. But if you're looking at things, especially when you look at for League of Legends,
Kings of Europe
season, right, where you have a regular season and you have to play, where a team is going to play 18 games, right, or in the LPL they play 17 times 3, right, up to 17 times 3 games. You're not going to introduce every game the same way, and the challenge comes into how much of this is going to be reintroducing the teams and how much of this is going to be entertaining the viewers. So it's always a mixture, right? How much of this is going to be entertainment in terms of selling the personality of the teams, and how much of this is going to be informing people as to what's going to be happening, and getting the balance right, and in terms of even planning things out down the road, right? So first few weeks, maybe you want to put a larger emphasis on introducing these teams, and then when it goes into the middle of the season, then you can place a bigger focus on entertaining people, and then tying that in with the cold opens as well. You try to bring out the personalities of the team. And towards the end of the season, you want to place a high emphasis on what are the sticks looking like in terms of who's making playoffs, who's going to be in the upper bracket, who's going to be in the lower bracket.
Actually,
Right.
can I ask, like, for Opal, you worked on the PCS, right? Do you guys actually sit down and say, okay, what do we want the vibe of the tournament to be like? And then, craft the cold opens and your narratives along that vibe? Is that something you guys, like, retroactively do as the season goes on?
So the best way to put it, like for us, because I'm actually technically the only full-time staff on the PCS.
Nice.
a lot of
Nice
how
flex.
well, that's the thing though, is I don't have my casters on hand for pretty much any day other than our show days. We have small little sync ups, but I technically can't say, hey, I need you to be here for X amount of hours, because technically they're not obliged to be there. I would love them personally to be there as a caster, as an average caster, but you have to set standards of, your work and being obviously compensated for it. And the other thing too is you have to kind of deal with a little bit of your producer as well as what your brand wants necessarily. So with PCS, we have to understand that this is a very brand new product, at least from the English standpoint, from Cantonese standpoint, from Taipei or Thai. Those guys are familiar with this kind of league, or at least some of the teams. But for the new English audience, outside of like what the teams were in the LST, all those LMS teams, we have to treat pretty much every show as if there is a new viewer watching it. Okay. So that means our team rundowns, our team rosters, they get a little bit repetitive, but we're there for the newbies, and that's why. And a lot of the regulars kind of understand that. Even when we did our VOD reviews over with Frost Garen, she even encouraged us to be like, hey, make a joke out of it. You guys have to be like, hey, sorry we got to do this, but this is for the newbies out there. Civ, he's a god. Kong, Uniboy, Mad Team Duo. We do it for those newbies, and that is a first season kind of thing. And we also had to really do that when we got launched on Dalal Esports. So that's something that we will likely continue to do for this season. But starting next season, we're going to start looking to craft it and give a little bit more personality of our own. That's obviously a goal that we're aiming at.
I think importantly as well, as the season goes on, you have this idea of continuity that you can build on from each split to each split, right? So you can see who fades in and out of each team, and you can then follow your idea of 3-layered narratives of like, okay, this player switched from this team into their team, or how does that affect the overall standing and influence the players themselves, and how does this affect the league? It just carries on, essentially.
Yeah.
And I'm going to move on to the next section here, because we said this is not a lecture in a dumb class. So if you're talking too much, people are getting bored, starting to fall asleep. Resonates.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Shotgun beer will help a lot as well. We're going to move forward.
Take a piss before we carry on. Okay.
Go ahead. Go.
Okay. I'm gonna turn off my camera. Okay. I'm just gonna point it up in this nice Star Wars photo. Okay.
But as we move on to next, I just want to touch on two things. Opal mentioned really quickly, because when I was working on the Oceanic Pro League and the LPL, that was a full squad where we would have story meetings, we'd have retros for our cast, we'd review, we'd practice, and one of the biggest things I learned, which is something we're going to implement today, not just because I'm a lazy fuck, but also because I think it's a great part of shoutcasting, is the 30-minute sync before a show. I think is the most important thing any newcaster can do, especially when it comes to introducing a show. And this is something that my mentor on the OPL, Jake Siberi, taught me, which is you can take in a lot of knowledge and you can learn everything about the teams, but the best way to present yourself at the end of the day is to look like the expert. If you say something convincingly enough, people can believe you. Maybe not Jensen, he's too smart to be fooled by bullshit, but you have to just sound convincing enough to at least portray that you understand what you're talking about. The best way to do that is to be on the exact same page as your co-commentator, be it a play-by-play commentator or a color commentator. If you're synced up and you both know exactly what everyone wants to speak about and you can tee each other up to talk about those topics, you're going to look great. The chemistry on air is going to look fantastic, and you'll be able to move through all your points quite quickly and have a very nice opening to your show itself. So I'm going to move us into the next chat, and I've got a lovely Hungry Cast with me here right now, who's an empty chair right now. We're going to move into what I have nicknamed the tutorial section of this show. I don't know. We put this together with, 15 minutes over the weekend, so I'm still not sure how this is actually meant to flow. But this is where Hungry Cast and I are actually going to pretend like we're preparing for a broadcast. So I've actually got I've got the live stream up here with 5 seconds left before the stream starts. It is one of the tiebreaker. It is the tiebreaker series for the PCS, and it's going to be focused on Nova taking on HKA. We're not going to dive too deep into it. We are just literally going to open the show. But like any good cast, before you go into a cast, you have to fucking prep for it. And what you do to prep for it is you usually open up this thing called Google. And you go through Google to, find all the information you need and watch all the shows and talk to the experts about it. But because I'm lazy as fuck, I've decided to call the 2 experts in the show, which is Opal and Jensen. Thank you very much for being here, because now we don't have to do all that. We can just ask you all the questions we want to know to start the show. So we're gonna use Jensen and Alex as our walking Wikipedias as Daryl and I start to prep for the show itself. And I've got my notes here.
It's gonna go perfectly. Nothing's gonna go wrong.
Nothing's gonna go wrong. So
for $2,000, what is Nova's third most champion?
All right, so
Fucking Thresher.
So Daryl, I haven't shoutcasted since I was with the Muppet Opal. I've done a few things here and there.
You didn't even do half this stuff with me, so I'm a bit actually peeved.
So I have not watched a competitive League of Legends game since January or March this year. I have not watched any competitive League of Legends, so I know nothing about this, and I know that you're coming in fairly blind into this PCS cast as well. So,
at the risk of getting stoned, I've been watching more Dota over League of Legends.
Oh no! Yeah. Can we?
It's that how it be, you know? It is how it is.
Just give me a second. Casey, can you jump on Discord? Because we just want to boot off Daryl now. He mentioned Dota. Cool. So what we're gonna do here is, Daryl, it's your time to do your research. You're going to be the color commentator, the analyst of this. So now's your time to do your research, and your research is Jensen. So you get to play 20 questions with Jensen. Ask him everything and anything you want to know, and just focus very specifically on all the information you need to open up the show. 5 to 6 points is pretty much going to be enough for us to do that. Once you're done with that, I'm going to sync with Opal. And then when I'm done syncing with Opal, we can sync together, and then we're going to do a fucking broadcast. It's going to look great. Like, we've got our Microsoft Paint broadcast here. It's going to be fantastic.
Do I ask him, now?
Yes, absolutely. Cool. And I'll be taking notes.
The first question, I guess, when it comes from a color perspective, is when you look at both teams, right? How do you see them, approaching this matchup? What are the win conditions for each team, and what has led them to success so far?
We're doing 20 questions, right? So my answer
no, you can. How 20 you do?
it's not. No.
It's just a general question, right? So from a game opening approach, what is the success point for both teams so far, and how do you see them approaching this matchup?
Success point for both teams. I think success point for both teams for Nova. Let's start with HK, right? We're doing Nova, right? So we start with HK. This is a team that focuses a lot on team play, right? When you compare themselves to the rest of the PCS in general, HK doesn't have the best players. Probably the only player who can you can possibly make an argument for being up there in terms of being able to rough it out of the big boys is the AD carry Eminem. Other than that, across the board, most of the other players are considered to be the tier 2 of the PCS. So they're serviceable, they have very defined flaws, but how they have to function as a team is they need to come together and work together as a unit, and they perform best when they were pulling off fancy wombo combos with the likes of Fiddlesticks in the mid lane to find success. If you want to draw comparisons to how this team plays, I would say that they play a more European style of team play. Fnatic to a certain extent, but I'll just say European in general, where they like to play, they open on 2 lanes, they actively sacrifice 1 lane, you will not see Curtis trying to pick up the wave from the weak side, and he will be actively trying to group out the team to contest for mid-prio, and so that they can set up for those key neutral objective team fights.
Right. Okay.
Whereas for Nova, this is going to be a star power team, right? So despite coming from the LST region, coming from the GPL region, this is a team where G4 and Rocky, time after time, they have been able to take it to the other Taiwanese talents in the PCS itself. And I think Rocky is a very big carry factor of this team itself. So this is a team that prefers to play mid-top when they have the likes of Literally. But what's interesting about them is that once they brought on Code and Feet in this split, they have been able to play through bot as well, with Ash being the most played champion in the bottom lane.
Right.
So the general one-word summary of how Nova Esports plays is that we are going to overload you on all fronts. We're going to draft 3 pushing lanes, invade you in the jungle, and snowball from the early game to a victory.
Okay, so to summarize, if I were to approach this from an opening standpoint, then we've more or less just derived our draft points already and how we're expecting the teams to play and how we expect the teams to draft. So on one side, it's team fight heavy, team play cover-ups for individual weakness. The other side is we're gonna go all out laning phase or die trying, right? And it's gonna be centered towards mid top, occasionally bot if they get Ashe. So these are like the power points you probably want to see when it comes to draft. And this is gonna be the basic opening that I'm gonna approach from a color standpoint of like what do we look out for when we approach draft. Yeah. Matt, do you want to go back and forth? Like, because if I'm just talking to Jensen, then Opal's kind of just...
No, we don't give a fuck about Opal, so it's fine. Just keep going. We'll finish all the color points, everything you want to know, then I'll deal with the Muppet.
All right. When it comes to power picks for each team, what is the number? Like, let's say three top picks for each team that operates in the most. It's the fulcrum, right? When they have these power picks, they feel more comfortable with the game. The dynamic changes. Each team 3.
HK is a very strange team, right? I wouldn't really say they have a power pick, but rather they have a lot of shenanigans, right? Like Moonblack in the mid lane, Heimerdinger is always something that you always have to be thinking about.
Right.
When it's going to pull out the Heimerdinger, and is this something that the team is prepared to deal with?
Yeah.
Other than that, I wouldn't really say HK has got like very particular power picks that they chase after, other than probably the Asriel, which is something that Eminem finds a great deal of confidence in.
Okay. Yeah, but that's the kind of shit I mean. Like, when you have these picks, the way they play the game basically changes a lot, right? Because for example, the Heimerdinger and the Ezreal, it imbues them with a level of confidence, I guess, when it comes to the matchup, and they feel much better. On the other side, for Nova?
Whereas for Nova, I think Kalista, the top lane for Rocky, is something that's been banned against him throughout the entire split.
Okay.
Something that you don't get to practice a lot. You don't get to practice against very often, and if you're facing against it, yes, he put it off against the two weaker teams in the league. But in general, teams have been just automatically banning this champion for him because they don't want to do the flag smith, and he has had a very strong carry presence on the champion in general. The other champion that you want to watch out for is Nidalee for the side of Nova.
Okay.
Because, like I said, this is a very full press kind of strategy. So if you give them like a Nidalee or Grace, this is exactly the type of champions.
They overrun you in the jungle with the lanes.
And they want to do buffs to invade your jungle. And if they are 3 pushing lanes, it's very easy for them to execute such a strategy. It's like Kalista, Nidalee, and probably the last one I'll be looking for is... I would say it's kind of like 2 champions, but it's like Bard and Trash for Pop.
Okay.
Because these 2 champions have been able to give Coden feed in the bottom lane, who traditionally AD carry has been kind of the weaker role for Nova. I wouldn't say so much this is a power pick, but it's a key pick that is able to cover for the weaknesses very well. Because both of these champions, they are ranged of sorts. They allow them to control the wave as and when they please, and it gives them a degree of safety as well with the magical journey and the lantern.
Right. Okay. So based off these three questions, I have a general idea. And bearing in mind, I came in completely. I have a general idea of what both teams are looking to draft as well as how they want to approach the game. So this gives me a way in when it comes to opening the show from a color standpoint. It also allows me to develop certain points from Matthew when it comes to the narrative, right? So let's talk about the journey so far for both teams. And when it comes from a color standpoint, have they been flat out, because it's a tiebreaker, right? Have they been flat out like up and down, or like have they been dominant but dipping off at the end? How do you rate their performance throughout the season?
How would I rate their performance throughout the season? Is it? I would say HK they had a good start, and I would have to say this is where it's a very meta dependent thing, because HK, their weakness as a team is that they are very limited in the champion pool. So if you look at Moonblack, this is a guy who doesn't play Syndra. He's not very good on your traditional mages. He's very good at the more unconventional things. Right. Zoe, LeBlanc, his 2 comfort champions, other than the kooky kind of Heimerdinger Fiddlesticks kind of champions. And in the bot lane, Ashe, Varus, Jhin, not really Dell style player. Eminem does well when he can those team fighting AD carries. I need to try to recall what he played last spring.
That's right. Don't put
the likes of an Asriel, when you give him the likes of, I would say maybe the Asriel Misfortune double matchups. That is where he excels at. Where you have these AD carries that can both play strong side, weak side. You don't really have to allocate a lot of resources into him, and then you can let the rest of the team just group up and then execute their wombo combo based around the various combo pieces.
Let's take a step back from looking at like the lane or the player dynamics in the team, but rather an overall team performance, right, throughout the season. As a coach and as an analyst, when you look at the team, you're like, okay, for them the problem is meta to meta, and when the meta shifts, their performance dips up and down, right?
Yes.
Would you say the same for Nova?
I would say Nova is a team that ignores the meta, and they're just going to play Nova style, right?
Okay.
You won't see them all of a sudden trying to pick up a new champion or whatsoever, and they're just going to keep staying in. Rocky loves to run Acton. G4, he's going to pick something that can let him push mid and be able to affect the team fights later on. And for bot lane, they're just going to play what's in the meta and something that allows them to do same idea, right? For Nova, they just want to push the lanes, and whatever's in the meta that fulfills these criteria, they would just play those champions instead.
So along the same lines, if a certain power pick in the meta rises up and it fits their wheelhouse, the way they like to play, that just makes the team that much more deadly in a sense.
Precisely, which is why it ties back to your original question, where Nova is now doing very well because Ashe, Caitlyn are very big parts of the meta, and these are champions that Nova likes to play. They like to play this enforcement style jungle. Ashe and Caitlyn, big parts of the meta. It facilitates that type of play style very well.
Right.
Where Hong Kong Attitude, their stock's going down because it's the opposite. This is the type of champions, and this is the meta that doesn't favor them. So
this team style play.
Towards the end of the season.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I pretty much hit my bases already, Matthew.
Nice.
Just those questions. Yeah, we can go.
Nice. And I saw a couple people in the chat as well mentioning, oh, this is League of Legends. No, this actually applies to everything. Yes, we're particularly diving into a PCS game here, but you just look at Daryl's research so far. What are these teams successful at? What is the power dynamic of these teams? What are they known for? And what's their journey so far? You can apply this to anything. FIFA, you can say, what is this player strong at? Is he great at crossing in? Is he good at dribbling? Is he good at playing skillful players?
Exact same line of train of question.
I don't know about Dotas. Fuck that game. Or a FPS game like CS or even Valorant. Valorant, you've got more dynamic.
Actually a really good example. Yeah.
Valorant is a bit more dynamic because you can pick different characters and they have different abilities and team composition. But even CS:GO, if you go into it, you can say, this player is a great entry fragger. He's going to be key for his team when they're on the attacking side because he has to do X, Y, and Z. This person's a great op. He's a great op player. He's able to hold defensive angles very well. So the way the team's going to have to do this is this and that. And same with power dynamic, their journey so far. They had a really rough start to the split. Weren't able to do so well, and then they climbed up towards the end, narrowly made it into the playoffs. Now they're in their tiebreakers. All these things are transferable across different games.
I'll give you an example of how my train of questioning actually applies in Valorant. So when I was looking at Skadoodle's journey so far in Valorant, right, on T1, he's actually started out really well by playing Sage as the backline opper, but then as Sage got nerfed, he swapped over to the Sofa. And context aside, you kind of see how the meta shift affects the team performance and how a certain player can also be affected by that. And overall, it just contributes to the narrative a little bit more. So for the most part, these are standard questions I think that anyone should, everyone should try to use when you're doing color research.
Of course, and some games do have very particular things. If you're looking at shooting games, what map bias is present, map selection, it comes into account. FIFA is going to be team. Which team are you using? Is it an ultimate team? Is it a specific club in the current play? So you do have to adapt it a little bit, but this is the general flow. And I think, we went with League of Legends today just because that's something we're very familiar with. So now that we've got your notes aside, you're the color caster, just useless. Let's get the real notes ready, which is the play-by-play side of things. So, you done with your donut, Muppet?
I am. All
right. Walk me.
See, Go ahead.
Walk me through a PCS broadcast. So I'm gonna start the video, by the way. So I'm guessing I'm gonna go into it, and then it's gonna be what? You're gonna have this really sexy intro video of all the players doing some really cool things. Yeah, there it is. Oh, look at him. There he goes.
Yeah, got fucking fire coming out of his hand.
You've got countdown. You've got fire hand video, and then what's after this? Do I see your Muppet face? Is that what's going to happen?
You're going to see B-roll into a Muppet face, into schedule of the day, into team rosters and breakdown.
B-roll into Muppet face, into team rosters. Wait, what? There's no. So Muppet face, then schedule. Is that right?
I don't know if we showed schedule.
Oh my god, what is wrong with you?
No, it was team matchup because we don't have a 3-day schedule. That's why. Yes, it was team matchup into team roster, and from there you do team intro. So you do the yada yada.
Yeah, people are saying you're soft again, Opal. Like, what's going on? You're meant to be.
I'll just get nice and close and start yelling again. All right.
You're meant to be a professional shoutcaster. Not very professional at the moment.
Hey, Casey's saying everybody's a little soft, all right?
Okay, you know what? I'll turn up the gain because I'm not a broadcaster anymore, right?
Hey, Opal, do you eat all 3 dozen donuts? No, right?
So I don't know what to do with, 90% of these donuts.
So you just buy the whole box and you eat one and you chuck the rest?
No, so I was like, I kind of want like some snacks for like the week, and I want like something sweet. So I was like, okay, I'll get like some donuts. I ordered like, like the only thing I could get delivered was either 6 or like a 12, and I was like, whatever, 12 is like an actual better one. And then they gave me 2 extra boxes of just plain donuts. So I have like 36 donuts.
You have 24 plain donuts. That's horrific.
Right. So I have a question right away for you, Opal. Why is there no schedule? Like for the day's schedule. This is the first time everyone's seeing this. Why is there no schedule?
Welcome to CG didn't have because this was an extra day.
Got it. So this was we had to play tiebreakers basically. Right.
Yeah. So, and this is also kind of the thing that you also picked a VOD where, if anything, there is going to be some chaos because this is the unplanned day from almost everybody's side. Because this was a day that didn't exist until I think the second last game of the day before it, once all these tiebreakers were forced upon us.
Got it.
So in this case, there's no actual schedule because we just don't have a holder for 3 teams at the moment. Again, we're running off a very niche setup at the moment because of COVID. So instead, you were going to get a playoff bracket that kind of showed what teams were already seeded and what we were trying to sort out today. So that should be what is after Muppet Faces.
Nice. So this is the first thing I would suggest any host or play-by-play to go and figure out. Be it go and find a rundown of your show or look through a VOD of a previous show that's similar and actually understand exactly what the flow of the broadcast is going to be. So for this case, we've got Countdown, Firehand video, B-roll, Muppet Face, Summer Playoffs graphic, team rosters, Muppet Face again, I can't spell, and then we end with going right into the game. This is really important because as a play-by-play, I do care about the analysis that Daryl is going to provide, but that's not my job. My job's to set him up to give you all that information and, to bounce and banter with him, but I care about actually running the show as much as possible. And oftentimes producers will work with their commentators to make sure they're moving at the same pace as them. Sometimes you do have multiple language broadcasts where that's not possible, and it's the commentator's job to react to what's moving along in front of them. You just have to work with what you're given, and those are the 2 things you really need to figure out right away. On top of that, if you're coming into a show, there's a few things you really need to plan out as well. Are there any sort of sponsor readings you need to do? Are there any sort of obligations you need to do? Are there any sort of key things the broadcast needs you to mention? You need to have all of this ready before you even start your show. Because if you go onto a broadcast and you run through your spiel and you're going through your script like fire, and then suddenly a sponsorship graphic comes up, you're going to look like a deer in headlights. So you've got to make sure you have this flow down. And this, what I've written down on the notepad here, is exactly what I would write on my notes every single time I did a broadcast. And where I put off my information is right below every single one of them. So I will run through something really quickly, which is usually you'll have things like a standings graphic and a regular split of a game or a series for the day itself. Those are also things that you should include in your preparation. And it's going to be something as simple as this standings graphic. You're going to want to be able to go through it in a way that you can present it to your audience. And you can script these super easily because you know what the standings are going to be. So you can come into it and say, okay, Resurgence as well as Liab and, Bajaya Dragus didn't really make it into playoffs, 8th, 9th, and 10th place, but we do have JT, AHQ, PSG as well as Machi all in the qualifiers at the moment. But we also have, Alpha, Nova as well as HK playing through the tiebreakers later today. And you just have a spiel ready for all the different graphics you're going to go through. So I am going to go through these one by one. So, Opal, in the countdown, what should I do? What do I do, Opal?
You shut up.
Okay, shut the fuck up. Okay, done. Cool. So, in the countdown, don't talk. What about Firehand video, Opal? What about this one?
You don't talk, but you get to jam out to some, sick beats.
Jam out to sick beats. Okay.
Get yourself pumped. You're getting into that broadcast. You got a hype video coming on in. Hit it on a high note.
Nice. Okay, what about B-roll?
B-roll, that's when you do your sexy open. That's when you unload all that narrative, all that day statement that you had ready to go, and you bring us in.
Fantastic. So I really like shows that provide you an opportunity to do a cold open. I think the LPL has one of the most interesting ones, which is they do a lot of crowd shots, they do a lot of B-roll of the stadium that they're in or the city that they're in, and you often hear the commentator commentating over it to start the day. One thing I like to do during the B-roll is set up a nice little snippet. Like, think of it like the caption of an Instagram or Facebook post. You know, it doesn't really provide too much to your day, but you'd read it and be like, yeah, okay, I understand what's going on, but not too much. And then lead that into how you're going to introduce the show itself. So what I like to take here for the sexy open time is highlights, key highlights, and colorful moments. So I like to just find something that I want to highlight for the day itself and have a colorful moment. And that will bring me into Muppet Face. What should I do during first Muppet Face, Opal?
Yeah, actually properly welcome yourself. You introduce yourself. This is the first time I'm seeing you on camera today. I want to know who I'm talking to for this show.
Cool. So that will mean I have to introduce myself as well as Daryl Hungry Slim. And this is something where you can just have a standard open. So a lot of commentators be like, good evening, I'm Matthew Fish-Stewart, joining me is Daryl Hungry Slim, and tonight we're going to do XYZ, or how you doing, Daryl, things like that. Perfectly fine. If you're starting out, you just want to do something simple, that's great. Another thing you can do is something very similar to what I did today, which I scripted our open for this show. You can go back and watch it on the VOD itself, but I had unique and interesting ways to both introduce Daryl as well as Jensen. Opal doesn't matter. And you can do things like that when you're introducing your show as well as your co-commentator as well. You can have it scripted. And when you have it scripted and written down and ready to go, you sound different every single time and you sound interesting every single time you do it as well. Cool. Okay, once I introduce the other Muppet, what do I do during my playoffs graphic?
During your playoff graphic, you're pretty much setting up, all right, this is what we're deciding today. We're trying to decide these final 3 seeds in playoffs. The top 5 have already been locked in. The teams that we're seeing play today, they're currently fighting for that final seed up in the top of the bracket and then deciding our lower bracket seeding. You want to set the stakes up of why are these teams playing? Regular season technically already over. They're already in playoffs, but why are we seeing these tiebreakers?
Cool. Isn't top 4 locked in or is it top 3?
Top 5 are locked in. This is a 3-way tie for 5th.
Ooh,
okay. So top 5, top 4 have already been locked in, and today we have a 3-way tie for 5th.
Or 6. Is it technically 6? Yeah, it's technically 6. Apologies.
One of those. It's fine. So we have a 3-way tie for today, and we're going to be going through those matches.
Berjaya got locked in 8th. I forgot about that. Yeah, so 5th. Yeah.
Cool. So, we're going to decide the final 3. We're going to decide the final seed for playoff, is it not? Or are all these teams in playoffs?
So, they're all in playoffs. Berjaya, that's the 8th seed. That was the last seed into playoffs. They can't get any better. That's why they're not playing in tiebreakers today.
Got it. So, 3-way tie for playoffs. This is just going to determine the seeding, and it matters because your seeding is going to do X and Y. Why does this matter? Why are you here today? Cool. And then team rosters. This is where I just introduced the Muppets, is that right?
Pretty much introduce the Muppets. Now, if you are on a more established broadcast, you will have a certain way of doing it, or you get to have a little bit of personality. PCS, unfortunately, like I mentioned, we are a new product, so I would expect you to be like, who is actually Nova? If this is the first time anybody's seeing this team, like, this is former, mega roster. You have the Thai Giants of Rocky, G4, you call back a little bit to where some of the international fans may have seen these players before when it comes to MSI Worlds.
By the way, Moonblack is the best name I've ever seen. That is a fantastic name. And HKA. Cool. And I think that's something that's very relevant to any broadcast you go into. You need to be basically filling out your show to the audience you're shoutcasting to. I think the LPL used to have this mantra where if you're doing a regular season game, your mantra is, I am commentating for the hardcore 5% of the English or Western fans that are watching this show. Whereas if you're doing a playoffs or a finals match, it completely switches, which is, I am commentating for everyone that wants to know which seed from the LPL is going to MSI/Worlds.
Right.
So you want to have that understanding of who am I doing this broadcast for? And I like what Opal says, which is, this is a broadcast where we are introducing these teams and players to the people watching, because they might not necessarily know who they are, because the majority of the people watching PCS are going to be following the local teams within Southeast Asia. So if someone comes and watches the English stream, for example, it might be somebody from all over the world that might not necessarily know what the PCS is all about. I think that is important.
And you're aiming to, like, especially with these teams, like, I'll give you your quick rundown what you should be focusing on. Like Nova, Thai roster primarily coming out of Thailand. Nova, this is their first venture into League of Legends Esports, which is their rather big brand when it comes to other, titles and mobile titles. And then, Hong Kong Attitude. This was the third seed from the LMS last year, but this is not at all the same team. Completely fresh roster, completely built from the ground up, and you want to hit that.
And this is really cool because you just gave a really good contrasting story between the two teams. Because Rocky, G4, Golden Feet, Pop, they've been around forever. Like, these are veterans of the League of Legends scene. I mean, G4 and Rocky both been to Worlds before. Golden Feet's a great Thai player. Pop, he's a miracle player who somehow played through, like, just coming out of the hospital the day before the grand finals of an LST split. So everyone knows these players, but Nova is a new organization, whereas HKA is the opposite. That is a historic organization that's been around for so long, but all the players are brand new. So you have that contrasting thing. It gives you that narrative. You can, when you start with Nova, you can start with the fact that they're a new organization but veteran players, and you go into HK, veteran organization, new players. Really nice contrast. It provides a little bit of flair to it as well.
And that's like one thing when going back to kind of like Daryl's notes is like I think a lot of that was missing, and that's why a lot for your play-by-play is you need to be the one to help drive some of these points, because if you only did the amount that you got out of Jensen and Daryl there, again, all about, hey, this is how the team plays, this is there, but you don't have necessarily organizational story, you don't have the player story yet, and that's your big opportunity as a play-by-play to actually seize that moment.
Exactly. Then we're going to go into Muppet Face Round 2. That's where we do our analysis of the day itself. And then we're going to send it to the gram. So that's pretty much summing up. Am I missing anything here from your notes, Opal?
Again, I would fill out a bit for player stories because you're going to have some opportunities to kind of do this. I think the best thing when it comes to pregame is you don't want to unload your game points until you start hitting that champion select and start to give reasoning for the picks. I think if you do a lot more overarching and then kind of player stories before the game, it helps also adds a little bit of relation to the players, to your audience, because if you go hardcore onto your like, oh yeah, this guy's like a god at this and he's been mechanically gifted as that, is like it appeals to you like 5% that are, relatable to that, but like you got to give a little bit of that personal player story in order to help connect your audience more.
So to interject, right, I think the best intersection for this is if the play-by-play comes in with a player angle and talks about how that could contribute to the analytical aspect of the draft. I think that's the best. Like, for example, you talked about how when Jensen mentioned Nova as a team, they play a certain way, or they rely on all lanes pushing and then looking at the jungle to kind of go all in and be very aggressive. Talk about the jungler, right? And if you see the draft catering towards the jungler, that's when the intersection comes in and it starts to pay off for the viewers.
Right, yeah. And I like what Opal's saying as well, which is you need to have that, like, I'm going to say top down, but reverse pyramid approach, I think it is. You have your overarching narrative, which is XYZ, big, broad picture, and then you funnel that down into very minute, nice little micro narrative points. The same way you would cast a game. You wouldn't go into a Summoner's Rift match and be like, this guy's item build for this game is going to be XYZ ABC. Because he hasn't built that yet and you just started the game. You would be like, okay, these two teams, these are the team compositions. This one's good early, this one's good mid, this one's good late. These are the reasons why. Then you go into the early game. Then you dive into a micro point of the laning phase. Then you move into the mid game. You dive into what's happened during the laning phase and how that's impacting the mid, and so on and so forth. So same with introducing a show. You don't want to jump in and be like, look at this team, they've got Golden Feet, best AD carry, why is he the best AD carry? And you spend your entire opening talking about one very minute micro point. You want to hit everything you can.
Unless, so you want to hit everything you can, but in most cases too, you are going to establish a matchup of a game in particular as well, in which you'll take a little extra dedicated time. We usually do it. There is sometimes a graphic that's a player v player graphic that just shows head-to-head stats, and that's meant to be us saying, hey, if we're going to take a look on paper at this matchup, we expect this to be the explosive catalyst on each side. Is if this player performs or this player performs, that team is going to get ahead.
It's something that I learned from architecture, funny enough, which is if you look at a lot of modern buildings, you'll see like the facade of a building will have like lines or like a little shelf in the middle of nowhere, does absolutely nothing. It's all to just break up the facade of a building. And that's kind of like what diving into a specific matchup does, because you're already talking about overarching things, and then you just go straight into a very micro narrow point. It just makes it a little bit more flavorful and gives you something to look forward to. And I like that. I like when commentators are able to do that whole overarching narrative and then dive straight into a really nice micro point. So added that in. Missing anything here, Opal? If not, I'm going to go talk to my color commentator. We can actually get a show on the road.
Yeah.
There's other stuff, but like from a base angle and for a lot of like your first time prep for a lot of your casters, this is a really good starting point.
All right, awesome. Now, let's dive into the second half of the tutorial, which is the pre-casting sync. So usually this is where you go through absolutely everything that's going to happen on air, and you do sync in between the breaks as well to see if anything needs to be changed. We're just going to dive into what we're going to do when we open the show. So, Daryl, we're going to open up this show. We're going to go into sexy open time, and we're going to do our Muppet face intro. You know, is there anything about you want to be introduced here?
No, not in particular, because I would work off the assumption that, you know, the casters are just like a medium for the viewers to understand. So we don't really have to stand out too much. Like your brand or how you come off isn't that important to me.
Got it. So
yeah.
I'll introduce myself, and I'll introduce you, and I'll say there's nothing interesting about you, because that's what you want me to do.
Extremely boring. All I do is just stay home and knit.
Extremely boring.
Pretty much just stat, paint, dry.
I like to ask how your day is going, so I'm going to ask you how your day is going, because I think it just provides that little bit of personality there. You know?
I like doing that, but I don't preface people. I just throw them off guard and watch their response. It's usually the fun part of the day for me.
Watch their response. Wow.
Yeah, usually they always get flustered. They always go like, I don't know, it's okay, I guess. Something along those lines. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, what did you have for lunch? You know, that's my question later on.
That's usually the good one. That's usually a good one. I usually ask Abriz why his predictions are 20 points down compared to everybody else and how he's going to pick.
My fault, guys. My fault.
We did have an interesting question from Evil Swap, which is if you're casting an open tournament and the two sides have never seen anybody before, what do you talk about? We can go into that later on, because there is some ways to cover that. We'll do that after we go through this.
Every like half of every Valorant tournament right now.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of casters aren't doing it correctly.
That is a really good question. But okay, so I'm going to introduce you, going to introduce Muppet Face, and I'm going to go through what today is. So, which is going to be when our summer playoffs graphic comes up. As soon as that comes up, Daryl, we stop talking about how the day is going, what the weather looks like, and we'll start talking about some fucking League of Legends.
So you have to understand that I can't see your screen, and I'm a bit fucked on this end, so you might have to... You know, I'm just looking at 4 panels of you, me, Oppo, and just Jensen, and I don't know what the fuck is going on your screen.
Right.
So you're gonna have to cue me in. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try and figure out how to... No, I don't need to get this to you. I'll just cue you in. You're smart enough to deal with it. Yeah. Cool. But we're gonna go into the summer playoffs graphic. The main narrative points I have here, we're deciding the final 3 season playoffs, the top 4 locked in, you know, there's a 3-way tie, and, you know, the part that I need help from you is, why does today matter and why are we here?
Yeah.
Cool. Do you want to let me know what is it you're going to talk about when we go into this graphic so I can write it down?
So for me, when I approach this, I think it has to be like a combined effort of like what are the stakes, right? So we talk about the seeding, like Opal mentioned, and when you look at the seeding, it pretty much, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, it's upper bracket and lower bracket based on the 8, right? So it's 4-4.
So it's 6-2.
6-2, right? Okay.
We have a round 1 that has a best of 3 only. For pretty much the top 2 teams got buys in the upper bracket, so that's how it's being seeded.
Okay, got it.
Cool. So how about we do this then? When we go into the summer playoffs graphic, I'm going to say today we're going into our summer playoffs. We're deciding the final 3 playoff seeds as the top X and the bottom 1 team has been locked in. And then that's where I'm just going to cold hand it off to you, and you can pick it up with, yep, it's a 3-way tie and these are the stakes. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, but this is going to go horribly because I feel like the beer is starting to kick in a little bit.
Fantastic. That's exactly what we're looking for. Cool.
Nice.
Then we're going to dive into our team rosters, by the way. So we're going to have a little bit of chat about, playoffs, why it matters. And we're going to be like, all right, today is going to be Nova taking on HKA. Cool. So we'll have a little bit of a spiel. What's the overarching narrative you want to sell for these teams? The overarching point.
So when I look at Nova versus HK, right, not just the play styles, but when it comes to the background, I mean, I've been looking at like PCS through the eyes of like GPL to now, and historically, when you look at the Bangkok team, it's always been like an underdog situation, all up till the point that they joined the PCS, and then they proved that they were able to, go head to head against the Taiwanese teams. So for me, it's like whether they could actually prove themselves against HK and consequently the further Taiwanese teams. That's from a historical standpoint. Looking at HK, I like the angle of the new players. I think that the brand in itself is super storied because you look at a single point, even Shawi went over to HK and he played in the LMS, right? So there's so much brand value but no player value. So when it comes into the that's like when you look at the league, right? And then you come into the teams, you look at where they come from, and then further on you move into players. I think that's the player versus player matchup that I want to highlight. I think top lane is where I might want to focus a little bit more because when I saw Rocky first come into GPL, back then it was like LST, right? He was actually a pretty hard carry. I think he dumpstered, I don't know, it was KLH? Single-handedly. I think it was KLH single-handedly in like the semis in 2017. Yeah,
cool. So we won't have too much time to dive into it, but if we do, we can. I haven't timed it, by the way. I don't know how much time we actually have when we start this cast. But
nice.
When we come out of the summer playoffs graphic, how about that's how I'm going to introduce these teams. Like it's Nova versus HK, and the first team we really want to dive into it's going to be Nova because everyone said that. The Thai teams previously from the GPL, previously from the LST, previously from, PCS, now back together with the original groupings of the LMS and GPL teams. Nova, they've proven themselves that they can play with the top dogs in the league. Yep. Now they have to try and prove themselves again to get a better seed going into the playoffs. So that's Nova's story. What's the HKA overarching story we're going to focus on here?
I think that they have the young players coming in because when you look at the new product of the PCS, right, I think one thing is it's a platform that also allows these younger players to come in. And the old brand and the new players schema is kind of something that viewers can get attracted to very quickly. They can get invested in these young players and underdog players as well. Yeah.
Cool. So that's basically going to be that. So the reason why I want to frame it this way is because even if we don't have the graphic coming up, I can say, all right, Nova versus HK. It's like the underdog of the PCS. They've proven themselves. Now have to prove how good they actually are. Then HK, they've rebuilt their organization. They've got younger and newer players in the organization. They're looking to prove themselves today. So it's all about who can prove themselves today. And when we do go and see the individual teams, the way I'll introduce them is I'll be like, Rocky, Ryan, G4, Cold Defeat, Pop. You've seen these players before. Some of them being the world, but this is Nova's first venture into League of Legends. And then the exact opposite of HK, which is you might not know any of these players. Kartus, Holo, Moonblack, Eminem, Tark, but HKA. This is a veteran team, a roster, an organization that's been around for a long time. So we can dive deeper into it there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we can also mention more specifically the... I don't know if you want to do players versus players, though. Is that too micro?
We can do that later. So once we come out of the matchups, we go into our final Muppet face section. What are all the analytical points you want to hit? Like, give me 4 analytical points you want to hit.
So the two that stand out to me, like I mentioned earlier, is top lane, right? You look at Rocky as the old school, like Jensen mentioned, hard carry style. He comes in, he pretty much can win the game for you if he gets his Callista. Versus, the top laner of who really literally just joined the split, Kartus. I think this is his first split with HKA, so it's like the guy that actually hard carries your team versus the newcomer who is playing his first split for HKA. That's like the top lane hit versus hit matchup. Nice. Look at the other one that I want to look at is going to be mid lane as well, whereas Moonblack comes in, not only with the quirky picks, but also playing his first split versus, someone like G4, who for a period of time was considered one of the better mid laners, and is still, I would think, a pretty strong mid laner in the PCS.
Cool.
And he only plays like mages, right? So like his champion pool is very well defined.
So it sounds like our micro points are going to be mid and top lane.
Yep.
I have a macro point I'd like to make, but I want to check with Mr. Opal here. Opal, if Nova win here, who do they play against in playoffs?
So pretty much, if Nova are able to win there, they are at least into the upper bracket. But they still have to play a game up against Alpha, which they'll be doing immediately after this. With that being said, if they are able to at least get one victory, they will play up against PSG. No. So they will play then the loser of the game at the end of the day. Because we have a three-way tie at the top, and we also have a two-way tie for third.
Got it. So a win here guarantees you upper bracket, is that right?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I think, Daryl, that's like our biggest macro point, which is the stakes of this game is if you win, upper bracket.
It gives the opportunity for you to experiment at least once in an adaptive series. But if you're lower bracket, you are done and dusted. You have to try your heart out every single way if you want to make it to Worlds.
And I think there's some cool things we could talk about here as well, Daryl, which is like, upper bracket is Machi and J Team. So if Nova wins, it's like you have a original LST team in the upper bracket. Right. And if HKA win, they're going back up against the former giants of the LMS.
Which is like old school, Taiwanese top 3, top 4, TPA, TPS.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think that's a really cool story we can dive into here. What's another good macro story we can dive into? So we've got the stakes of the game. What about an overarching story about the matchup today? Maybe team play styles, like how the two teams play.
Right. So I think that factors a bit more into what we expect to see in draft and how the players are going to influence the game as a whole unit of the team. Right. I'm not sure if we want to talk about this too much pre-game because it's pretty much just alluding to the draft, right? So we expect to see Team A play this specific style, Team B play this specific style. We could talk about expectations when it comes to clashing head on, but that's a bit more, towards the color side, a bit more strategic, right? So we're not hedging our bets and predicting what's going to happen.
Nice. Okay, cool. So we could dive into it a little bit, right? We could talk about the play style of the team. Nova's a snowbally team. I had HKA's notes here too. HK is a team that focuses on team play, and then Nova is that snowball team, right? So we can touch on that. We can talk a little bit about how those styles work and how they clash without diving heavily into picks. And if we have time, we can dive into it, if that makes sense.
Can I just take a moment to digress? Your points are actually pretty... I don't know if it's the FPS, but they're blocky, so I'll try my best to read them off. I can see the big font, but the tiny fonts are
unlucky.
Kind of
The reason why you won't need to read any of this is because I will queue up for all of it. Don't worry.
Nice.
I have no way to get this to you right now without opening up Facebook. Didn't think of this beforehand. Casey's already...
If only there was a way to use Word on the internet.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Casey's already... freaking yelled at me about it. You know what, Casey? You're the problem, all right? You didn't tell me beforehand. Okay, but I think, from my side, Daryl, I'm confident I've got everything I need. Is there anything else you want to push in before we jump into this?
I'm just going to say this is going to be a horrible idea. And according to Spoots, who mentioned on the chat, Drunky Cast is... Yeah, that's not a bad name from what's going to happen from this. Drinky Cast. Yeah, it's a terrible...
All right. So, without further ado... let's get into it, Mr. Daryl. You feeling confident?
That's it.
I'm not feeling confident. I'm not feeling confident, so if you are, something's wrong.
Yep. This is gonna crash and burn.
All right, let's dive into it. We've got no music because, copyright, so yeah, we're just gonna go with it.
I can make some music. Give me the key.
Here, I can do it. I got it off. Well, it's doing so.
Go music now.
Bumper,
we're doing
3, 2.
No, we're on a delay, Opal.
Well, you just
now music. Yes.
No.
Fire hands.
On yeah. Dun 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 da 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 dun dun dun. Put it up. Put it up. Put it up.
Yes.
Put it up. Bring it up.
This is the
best. Respect and honor. It's like something like that long.
It's still going. Got a bit more. Got a bit more.
The extended one. Dun.
It's rest from J Team now. Come on, we're not done.
Why is it rest? Oh,
You're the one that said jam out to sick beats, Opal. You need to jam out. Yes. All right, and we're back for more Pacific Championship League. We've got our tiebreakers match today. Everything is on the line for the teams that will be playing tonight to see who is going to be heading into the upper bracket and who will be facing off in the first few lower bracket rounds of the PCS. My name is Matthew Fish-Stewart. Oh no, that's a Muppet. Wait, let's pause it. That's a Muppet, all right? Okay. Don't worry about the one that's over here. Cool. But my name is Matthew Stewart, and joining me tonight is the ever so handsome Daryl Hungrycast Lim. There's nothing interesting about him. He's extremely boring. Daryl, what did you have for lunch today, buddy?
Well, I decided that I want to have some bak kut teh, so went out and got it. Realized it wasn't that good because I had to wait, and COVID is a son of a bitch. So in the end, I got my food. I wasn't content. Went home, prepared for the cast, and now we're here.
Fantastic. I mean, some people might know what bak kut teh is. Could you explain that to people back at home that might not necessarily know the dish?
Bak kut teh is the literal translation is like pork bone tea, pork bone soup, but it's fantastic and delicious if you can get the right one. It's not worth queuing though, especially the one near my house. It's just 30 minutes of disappointment when you eat and you're done and you're just like, why did I even wait?
30 minutes of disappointment. All right. Give me 1 second because I've lost you on the stream cam and I know how to fix this. Yeah, so you know what? It's gonna no need. It's gonna swap to me. Okay. All right, and then it's gonna swap back and you're gonna be right there. It's fantastic. All right, cool. I actually really like bak kut teh, so I'm actually kind of jealous that you managed to go out and get it today. I had McDonald's for lunch. Oh goodness, my PT is going to be so upset with me if he ever sees this.
You're supposed to be cutting weight, Fish.
Yes, I'm meant to be, but then I saw an advertisement for McDonald's, and the guy that's doing the voiceover for it right now is
big F in chat for Matthew's diet and for his wife who has to put up with his diet breaking habits.
It's like actually more swole than Fish. I'm just saying.
Opal, you're not on this broadcast. Leave. I'm just saying. Leave.
Is that the ghost of the PCS?
It's the ghost of the PCS broadcast. Yeah, well, I saw the ad. I had Macca's, but all right, Daryl, let's jump straight into it because tonight we're going to be going through our summer playoffs. Our tiebreakers for the summer playoffs. This is our playoff bracket. We got Machino and J Team in the upper bracket, Bajaya Dragons who were locked in the final seed of playoffs. They'll be playing in the lower brackets. But today we do have 3 games to play. And first up is going to be Nova taking on HKA in our first tiebreaker match of the night. And the reason why this is really important to us is the fact that the winner of that first game is going to go into the upper bracket and they will play off against one of these teams. They still have a couple of games to play later on. There is another tiebreaker that they have to go through later, and we have a final tiebreaker of the night going on. I'm going to pause it really quickly. If I was a good commentator, I would have remembered that this is part of the research I should have done to figure out which teams are going to be playing later, but I don't know, and that's bad. But let's continue.
Alpha and I would say PSG?
Yeah.
No, PSG.
Yeah. Some of those teams. Doesn't really matter. Good point. Should have made a note of that so I could talk about it instead of being a deer in headlights. But, yeah, so the top 4 teams have already been locked in, but there is a 3-way tie in the middle of the bracket. So, Daryl, we're getting close to the end of the PCS here. We're finally going to see who's going to be playing off against... Oh my goodness, Opal, this actually swaps so quickly. We're finally going to be seeing who goes up against one another. But let's dive into that first matchup of tonight, shall we, Daryl? First up, it's going to be Nova taking on HKA. And for Nova's roster, we're going to see Rocky, Ryan, G4, as well as Cold Feet and Pop in the bottom lane.
Yeah, and when we look at the HKA roster, we have... Oh, hold on.
Oh, no, it doesn't... So, doesn't swap over. We should have gone through this during our practice.
Okay, cool.
But, right after Nova, talk about Nova, dive into their point. Go.
Right. So, Nova right now, the roster is pretty experienced. I mean, we saw some of them in the spring split earlier this year. And, of course, these are names that will be familiar to people who have been watching the World Championship from last year. Rocky and G4 making a reappearance. Ryan here coming in the jungle, relatively new, but he's been gelling pretty well with the team overall. And that's been showing in the playstyle a lot. I mean, we talked about how this is a team that likes to go full offense, full court pressure, in fact, and just go into the enemy jungle and try to make things happen. So, G4 and Rocky will be the 2 that we look out for as we see the top laner of Nova Tai himself. with some of his champion pool being displayed, of course, these are picks, that really work to their advantage.
Exactly.
G4
I
in the
mean,
mid lane, there you go.
These are household names. Like Rocky G4 been the Worlds before. They've been in the Nova organization and part of this squad for the longest time. But Nova, this is their first venture into esports, unlike their opponents for today, which is going to be Hong Kong Attitude. But although they're an organization that's been around for a long time, their players have not. Cartus, Holo, Moonblack, as well as Eminem and Tak in the bottom lane. These are new players. Unlike the Nova roster, a lot of them have not played too many splits of Professional League of Legends. What are we really looking out for this team, Daryl?
So when I'm looking at the roster right now, I might have to fact check and recant some of our statements because Eminem and Wing, I believe, have been playing, for a while now on the HK roster. But the problem with that lies in the top half of the map, towards the mid lane to the top side. The top laner, jungle, and mid laner is kind of, having their first two splits for HKA, and that's going to pose a problem because in parallels, G4 and Rocky have been solid, old school players coming in. Although the brand is storied, it's old. How well are these new players going to match up to the experienced veterans is the question. And I think both teams really have a lot to prove because when you look at HKA, the brand is old. They came from a legacy of LMS, and even before that in the GPL, they've just been dominating the GPL, right? These Taiwanese teams. Whereas for the longest period of time, the previous brand, BKT, has been almost the laughingstock of the GPO when they first entered, and now they're trying to prove themselves when it comes to finding a spot for themselves in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull up your notes quickly. Eminem is the tier 1 player, the rest of them are tier 2. So yeah, that's kind of why we see Eminem on the screen right now. He's one of the best AD carries in the league, whereas the rest of the team not quite making a name for themselves. Is that not what Jensen taught us? Pause. Cutting. I'm going to Jensen, did you teach us this?
Yes, I did.
Yes, he did. I listened.
Eminem is top of the league.
Look, you two.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said.
He said tier 1. He said tier 1, which means best. No more arguments. We have the microphone. Final say. Okay, all right, let's go. He's a tier 1 player. Rest of the team not as high caliber as Eminem as in his position. But I do, like we said, it sounds like both of these teams are really trying to prove themselves here today, Daryl. Nova, they've been trying to prove themselves in the LSC for the longest time. Now they've proven that they can play against the teams in the LMS now that it's combined back into the PCS. Whereas HK, it's a new squad, new players. They're trying to prove themselves to still be one of the top dogs in the LMS.
Like you mentioned earlier in the playoff brackets and where things stand right now, it's kind of poetic to see that, the top 3 teams, the top possible 3 teams in the playoffs are all Taiwanese, right? So this is like a throwback to the old days of the GPO, which is, pretty much what we've been accustomed to. And now if BKT, or rather in this case, Nova, slip of the tongue, managed to break into this upper quadrant of the playoff, that's going to mean so much for them and their fans as well, holding on to this brand for so many years now.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, previously, before the split of the LMS and the LST, it was all on one competitive circuit, which was the GPL, where teams from the LMS and teams from the LST used to play against one another. Now with the PCS, those giants from the LMS that have been the world champions that are trying to make big runs, like Flash Wolves in the past, AHQ, HKA, they've merged back in with the LST, and the biggest question in everyone's mind in the region is, can those LST teams live up to the task of playing against the top dogs from the LMS League? Nova has shown that they can. Now the question for Nova is going to be at what capacity can they, and it's a big day today here, Daryl, because one of these teams will make it into the upper bracket, whereas the others will have to continue playing through these qualifiers to see where they land in the standings. But enough about that. What are we expecting to see in today's matchup, Daryl?
So we look at both teams. Let's approach it from a overall play style first, right? We look at HK as a team that really prides themselves on being able to cover up for individual weaknesses. You talked about Eminem being the only tier 1 player, right? The rest of the players on this squad are serviceable at best. So they make up for this, and they prove themselves, time and time again. They make up for this by having excellent team play. And it comes down to controlling objectives, fighting over objectives, and winning those fights. And that's how they really find a big W at the end of the game. On the opposite side of the coin for Team Nova or Novatai in this case, well, it's kind of tricky because they play through lanes. They are a team that excels at pushing forward all their lanes, getting the lane priority, and then going to the jungle and making the opponent's life a living hell. And it's very much reflected in the way that they draft as well. They like to pick very strong mid and top laners, and a jungler that can make use of and take advantage of the enemy when they can't really respond to early invades and aggression.
Yeah, it just sounds like they have, different play styles here. HK is going to be the team that plays as a team, tries to get that wombo combo going, whereas Nova is going to be that really aggressive team, expect them to push all their lanes and expect their jungle to be hyper aggressive up against HKA. So very interested to see the clash of styles going into this first game, but I really want to dive into some of the matchups as well. Let's start with the top lane. I mean, Rocky is an old school player that we all know. What do you think about Rocky playing the top lane against HKA today?
We looked at some of his power picks earlier, talking about what matters to Rocky, and consistently throughout the whole split, his Kalista has been banned out, and of course the power of the flex pick comes into that. So we have to, view him through the lens of a carry player. I think when we highlighted some of the champs that he's been picking so far, the Mordekaiser as well as Wukong, very high impact when it comes to what they're trying to do as a squad. If he can demolish lane, he's just going to demolish lane. If he can't, then well, they're going to try and make use of that later on and give him the advantage or give him the opportunity to become a side lane threat.
He's up against a rookie top laner as well, and one champion has been banned against him the entire time is Kalista. The biggest question going to every single champ is is Kalista going to be open? Highly doubt that's going to be the case here up against a rookie. And I mean, we got to see if HK can play towards that top side. Nova is a really aggressive team, but HK is known towards playing towards their top side whenever they can. But let's take a look at the mid lane matchup instead, shall we? Because G4, player that's been to World Championship before, up against Moonblack, another player that is relatively unknown up until this season of the PCS. What do you think of the mid lane matchup today?
So when we looked at Moonblack, his champion pool is kind of eccentric in the sense that I think Jensen mentioned. He has this weird one-trick Heimerdinger style pick on the back of the pocket, and the rest,
let's go.
You have that LeBlanc, which is, kind of meta and pretty strong at the moment, but he still has that hidden pick that, you have to ban out against it. Otherwise, the style of the game revolves around that. You kind of have to play around the Heimerdinger, whereas for G4, he's traditionally been, he pivoted from assassins and now he's playing control mages, famous throughout the history of this region for playing Orianna and Rise especially. So these two are kind of his power picks, and I think when you look at how they face off, I think G4 has to get the edge for his team here, as well as Rocky if they want to find an early lead and transition that into early strength to getting the win at the end.
Yeah, almost unorthodox against orthodox here, because G4, he's great at control meta. He's known for those champions like Rise and Orianna, like you said, and has been known as an assassin player in the past. We even saw him at the World Championship bring out assassins from time to time. So really curious to see what's going to happen in this mid lane matchup, because it is going to be quite interesting with that unorthodox against orthodox playstyle. Final thoughts, Daryl, before we go into Champion Select.
I am hedging my bets on Nova when I look at the hit-to-hit matchup, not only in players, but as well as experience and overall playstyles, purely for the fact that, when we move on to the meta as well, you look at Nova as a team that excels when the meta is in their favor, otherwise they just play their own style. HK has had a rough set of patches, let's put it that way, where it doesn't really fit what they're trying to do, and it comes down to them being unable to adapt properly. So I think I'd be inclined to give the game over to Nova when it comes to this tiebreaker. Well,
let's see if Nova can do just that. Conflicting playstyles between the two teams, conflicting organizations, one new to League of Legends, one old, and different rosters as well. One brand new roster, a legacy roster coming in from Nova, and even all the way down to our matchups. It's going to be unorthodox against orthodox. Let's get into Champion Select of game number 1 between Nova and HKA, and we are done. Well done. Not bad. I mean, I think for two inexperienced Muppets and absolutely nothing.
I completely forgot that this VOD we had champ select issues, so this shows why you do your prep and lots of it. Because that should have been only about a minute between the last player cam and champ select, but it was actually fine.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fine. Like we had enough information there to continue going through everything we wanted to talk about during Champion Select. And bear in mind, like, there were so many times during that where Daryl and I could have done a lot better with proper research and really fleshing this out and actually sitting down and doing
like reiterating Jensen's points. Like, I'm just cheating off a test, like, this is what he said and this is what I'm gonna say. I just feel so like, I
actually have some things to say with regards to that, right? Because the way that you're just regurgitating my point is that the way that I make my point is always in relation to the questions that you ask. But in context of what you guys established earlier, is you guys are trying to paint a narrative, and you guys said to avoid going too much into the nitty-gritty. Right? So that's a difficult thing here, and I felt that you guys fell into the trap of like going too much into the analytics.
Absolutely. And
Right, for sure.
I think it also shows why, it literally shows why practice and
for sure,
preparation are pretty much the biggest things. Like, we're trying to cheat this by doing a session where we talk to an analyst and an expert from both cross play as well as color. So there were a lot of times where there were hiccups, and a lot of times we could have planned those narratives and done a lot better. But that's pretty much everything you kind of need to do. I think the setup was fine. I think the points were okay. What did you think, Alex, from a narrative and player play perspective?
Obviously, since I have more information, so there's certain information I would have liked to hear a little bit more about. Personally, when you guys are talking about historic things, I would have also, and this was again a question that maybe should have been asked by you while you're doing a little bit of research, or maybe something that was overlooked by Daryl when he was asking some of his things, and that was like, what was the team's performance like from the course of the season?
Right.
And one of those big things was with HKA. In spring, they did actually have one remaining member from that World's roster, and it was 3Z, and he was kind of that veteran of the squad. And
Oh, he's a top laner, right?
He was the top laner.
Triple
yes.
Z, resident sleeper.
And he was, and he actually popped off during last season's playoffs, and right when he started getting good, he couldn't come to agreements with the team, and he departed. So they had to then bring in Cardis, which was a substitute over from G-Rex, and other things too. I would have loved to tell you about is I personally also would have. I always love getting player or coaching quotes and using that in your pregame as much as possible. One of the best lines that we get to use about Hong Kong attitude is when we talked to Skywalk. I got to chat with him a little bit over toward the side. I asked him, like, why did you decide to go with this roster? And his words are literally, this roster is my biggest gamble ever when it comes to esports. He knows that this roster will either make or break on a coin flip, pretty much. So it's getting some of those powerful quotes can be really good. Like G4, we talked to him a little bit via the translator, and he actually felt like with Golden Feet, they actually had a shot at making top 4 this season. So there's a lot of confidence in this team, and even them maybe only just getting into the upper bracket is a bit of a disappointment to them.
Right, and I remember that from when we were casting LST as well. We used to have a couple of coaches just drop down and give us some tidbits before we went into game. I think Liab's coach used to do it a lot. Was it Cabbage?
Yeah,
was it Cabbage?
We even did with Jensen at the start of the season. You know, we asked, how you feeling about the Surgeons? Famous last words, but like
the quote that you guys keep using is that every time the graphic pops up, Shinsekai has a KD of 0.8. And then you guys keep reusing the quote like, Jensen really thinks Shinsekai can be the next
Well, that's
no.
what you said. That's literally what you have said to us.
Well,
like, I
fair
think
enough,
Shinsekai has promise. So we're going to be like, what? Because what ends up happening is if it finally does pay off, it pays off greatly. It's like, this is the promised talent that we're finally going to see.
Alex,
and
that's the
finally,
saying.
we got to see it. We got to see it on the Gangplank. We got to see it in the final week. And it popped off, and you eliminated Liab out of the playoffs. That alone was a pop-off for us.
I'm just going to put it out there as a saying, even a broken clock is correct twice a day. So even if you repeat it, sometimes, it comes off as like, oh, well, you hit it anyway.
You never know, right, Jensen? Like, one day Opal just goes on cast, like, Shinsekai is going to do this, and then he actually, goes 20-0, carries the game. You look like a god. But no one really remembers the couple of times you don't. It's just the one time.
Like 888.
But then just like every time I watch the clock, there's like this game where he goes like 0-5, 0-6, 0-7 on the Jace, and that's like he's dying in the side lane. Then Opal just repeats the clip. What's going on here?
Well, because then we get disappointed because we're trying to figure out, especially when he is literally inting for the wave. I remember that game, okay? He used his entire kit on the wave and then got killed 3 times back to back. I'm allowed to call this out when I'm saying, all right, where's this so-called talent? Because it's stupidity right now. That's what you're allowed to do.
All right, let's just check in and see if anyone that's still watching from the chat has any questions they'd like to ask before we end the show. I do want to go back to Evil Swat's question because I thought that was a really good one. What do you do if it's an open tournament and you don't know anything about the teams or players, or you have no access to the teams and players before you go into the tournament itself?
Well,
I think Opal and Daryl could probably cast the most open tournaments here, so probably
This is actually relating to the point that Jensen made. Like, you go too deep into the nitty gritty. One thing I do, and it's a bit of a crutch, if I don't know the players that well and I can't establish narratives, right? What I end up doing inevitably is I talk about the strategics of the game because I am by nature a color caster. So for example, Valorant, if I don't know the players and I don't know the particular team brands that well, I just end up talking about the game, which is a crutch for me, but it works because I feel comfortable doing it.
Personally, for me, I think it's a very bad excuse to say like you don't have access to people, especially nowadays in like in our industry and how easy it is to communicate. Like I don't like the argument to say like, hey, I don't know anything about anybody in these open tournaments. The best thing that you can do as a caster outside the cast is to be involved in your community, to help get yourself that information, to help bring that information to the table. It's very rare that you're just going to have a bunch of gnome names unless it is a like bronze level sign up. But hey, then you do the simple thing of like, during the pregame, if you're in the lobby or something like that, be like, just ask them like, what's their favorite food or something. Give a little bit of personality to them because it'll help relate them a lot easier. That's one thing we had to do a lot back in NA when I was doing a lot of amateur in NA is we did Compete League. In Compete League, we had like 34 team leagues and we'd cycle through teams and we'd see them maybe once every 4 weeks or so. Kind of deal. So we always had to find new information or just interact with the players to a degree to try and help drive some of those stories. So I think that's the best thing you can do is just simply ask them questions and don't be afraid to, if you're especially if you're at an open tournament or something like that, don't be going around be like, yo, who's everyone? Like if you ask like 5 people and they kind of give you 3 or 4 names, they're like, oh yeah, these guys are like they're kind of stomping the local scrims or something like that. It helps build up like that kind of stuff. It's like already for PCS Pro Morello, I've already started fishing around trying to see, like who's like actively in that tournament, who's feeling confident with their chances before I've even seen the sign up sheet.
So what Opal is saying is just stalk the players within limits, right? To get as much information about them as you like.
Try and get whatever information you can.
Be
something, right?
What
be
about,
polite about it.
I'm curious.
Straight up polite.
I'm curious about Jensen's thoughts. Like, how would you approach let's say, a game where you really don't have any information about the cast itself?
Well, so I wouldn't say that. I think it depends on the game they're in, right? Because if you're like casting things like League of Legends, it's pretty much open source information. You can search the names on the ladder, you can search the IDs on op.gg and stuff like that. Your life is easy when you're casting League of Legends. But I'm thinking that you're casting, say, Magic the Gathering Arena, where you're casting JSpan73 against Chandra Basco 42, right? And then these are both players that could be mythic, and then they're playing over there, and your ability to talk to them because there's no in-game chat function is going to be limited as well. So I think that there are situations where you might end up in a situation where you can't necessarily reach out to people, and then you are really dealing with two unknown entities of sorts. But like I said, like I think Opal is no excuse as much as you can. If it is available, you can do it. And if it really isn't available, here's this very radical suggestion. I would just think that just make up a backstory for them, right? If they have username, then tell their backstory in a fictional way, right? Just tell the backstory in a fictional way, right?
I actually like that.
You can.
I like that.
Do is like over the course of the game, you can make up that story. If you're like getting all this information, like if they're playing like a certain kind of deck, it's like, oh man, you got to wonder, did he swap on over from this when it became meta, or he's been playing it since the beginning when it was trapped?
Team A's Paul, he's actually the long lost brother of Team B's Bob, and they're playing in the bottom lane today, 80 carry versus 80 carry. They haven't seen each other for 20 years. So like just some mythic. That's a really cool idea. Now I want to try that.
The Magic example is pretty cool as well because like colors have stereotypes in Magic, right? If you play like aggro burn, you're this kind of person. So you could kind of almost flesh out a personality for it. But after he's done, aggro burning this game, he's just going to kick a dog or something. Like he's that kind of guy, You flesh out these, ideas for him. That's kind of
He's a Riven one trick. The fact he's even playing coordinated League of Legends in a team is a miracle.
He played Yasuo mid lane. He's either going to go 0-9 or he's going to go 19-0.
Yeah,
we'll find out. It's
some dirt, depending on either one. It's a Yasuo
but
main. It's fine.
I also think that another route you can take with it is to over-index in everything that you have available, which is what's the meta? What's this tournament all about? Why are these players here today? Where have these players signed up from? How long the tournament's going to last? History about the tournament. I think a good example a good example of that would be something like the Zotac Cup that Riku and I went to go and cast last year or the year before, where it was a charity tournament where a lot of the players were just from an online bracket playing one-on-ones, knew nothing about them, and we just over-indexed in the players that we did know. Players like Voyboy who traveled down for the event. And then for the players we didn't know, we just literally said, look, we don't know this player, never seen him before. We know that he came from the online bracket, and then we built those stories around everything they did.
And you know what? They get an upset over Voyboy or something.
Which he did.
For the duration of that tournament, he is now the Voyboy Slayer. Simple as that. It's,
actually, a really like quick way forward also is you can just straight up ask your organizer, like, what hook do you want, or what angle is it that you have in mind for this particular event? Because, you know, event orgs don't throw tournaments for no reason, right? They always have some end goal in mind. And be it a community tournament or even a corporate tournament or like a, you know, tier 1 esports org competition like BTS, there's always a catch. You know, find out what the catch is and over-index on that. And try to build into the idea of continuity. I think people always like to look forward to the next event. So if you can get some sort of buy-in from the organizer and say, oh yeah, this is the first of many, you know, we're expecting a couple more, that tends to help.
I think the best like kind of demonstration of this that actually happened in like a official League of Legends capacity, I think it was like All Stars 2 years ago, is when Pabu actually showed up. And like if you weren't from OS, you had no idea who Pabu was. Simple as that.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish your point first.
I think then it's like, oh yeah, we're not going to expect a whole lot, and that was kind of the mentality. And then, you know, beats a couple people, and everyone's like, oh shit, okay. And then the casters played with it. They're like, well, he's the Slayer, and he took out the other half of the bracket, and that's why now when you see him on any kind of international approach, everyone calls back to that event. And I think that's what's one of the really cool things when you're in a rather an open style of event where there's a lot of different variables that you may not know. I think it's kind of cool that you might be part of that moment where you can help establish that guy's brand for the next, you know, little bit, and then help that get grown. And I think that's like a cool aspect.
I do have a slight point, which is, you know, those casters could have, talked to the Australian casters and, you know, found out a little bit about Pabu.
Fish, we're partying in Vegas. Do we have time?
Had you have asked any Oceanic Pro League caster, they would have told you, you know, Pabu was a mechanical genius and up-and-coming young player that could, you know, do really good. No excuse there, but yeah, you know, not to flame everyone, but just flame them slightly. But no, I do like that point. It is a good point. We don't have any other questions coming about opening a show coming from the chat, so I think this is a good time to stop with the Muppetry for the first day. Yeah. Before we go, though, do you guys want to say any last things before we sign off? Hungry, any last things?
No, I had a joke lined up, but I'm kind of like over it now.
All right.
It wasn't as funny as I thought it was going to be.
Done. Just like your profile, you know, boring and not interesting. Jupiter Storm, anything?
Shinsekai will one day be the best.
Best line. All right, Mr. I just ate 24 donuts and I can't really speak too much now. Opal, any last words for the stream?
She has to plug the PCs.
I'm gonna just take Fish's advice and just don't be shit. That's what you just need to be. Nice. Easy.
That is the best advice ever. Don't be shit. Keep casting. Do good. That's the end of the broadcast here tonight.
Are we doing this shit next week? We are, right?
Not next week. So next week we will be taking a break. Every fortnight we'll come back and do something. I'll try not to have Alex on next time. You know, a little bit of detriment to the broadcast itself, showing up late to the call time and everything.
So many things we didn't go over. Oh my god!
I'd like to thank Hungry, Jupiter Storm, as well as Opal for jumping on the broadcast tonight. We're still going to be playing some video games after this, guys. If you want to stick around, watch me feed them video games, you're perfectly welcome to. And do remember that all the streams today are for all the streams this month and throughout the rest of the year are for charity. And for the month of August, we are donating all the funds received to the stream to Ugachaga, which is a charitable organization in Singapore that works with LGBTQ plus individuals as well as families and couples since 1999 in Singapore. So thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you guys next time for some more Muppetry.
What's the look behind it? Do you see someone?
I just heard